Okay, so I kind of changed the plan a little bit with the lecture. I'm not exactly going to list all of the connections between what's in these lectures and what we're doing like in theatre, which is kind of how I was thinking about it before. But rather, I'm more thinking about how it can be a kind of experiment, an exchange of knowledge. So it's more about a methodology than a theory. It's more about sharing a methodology. So if we were to say right now, let's build a complex adaptive system out of people in this room, what would happen?
Aren't we already a complex adaptive system?
Okay.
Each individual, you mean? It's together?
No, as a situation, I believe so.
Like if we had a group conversation, would that make us a complex adaptive system?
Yeah.
If we're just sitting here individually.
But we're not just sitting here individually. We are a seminar. There's a speaker. There are plenty of
Yeah, as long as we just listen to him, but if we start interacting, it becomes complex and adaptive.
Yeah. So it's almost like I only have to pose the question, or someone has to pose the question, and then we become this thing. And then there's a question of also then there would be further questions about like what kind of complex adaptive system would we want it to be? Like, I guess the questions would be like, what do we want it to do? What's its goal orientation? What's its goal coordination? Its goal directedness? Okay, that's that experiment. Let's get.
Hi. This is the space. Look at the space. Hi. This is the space. Look at the space. Hi. This is the space. Look at the space. Hi. This is the space. Look at the space. Hi. This is the space. Look at the space. Hi. This is the space. Look at the space. Hi. This is the space. Look at the space. Hi. This is the space. Look at the space. Hi. This is the space. Look at the space. Hi. This is space. Look at space. Hi. This is the space. Look at space. Hi.
This is space. Look at space.
Hi. This is the space. Look at space. Hi. This is the space. Look at space. Hi. This is the space. Look at space.
Hi. This is space. Look at space. In space, there are 4 actors.
Hi. This is space. Look at space. In space, there are 4 actors. Hi. This is space. Look at space. In space, there are 4 actors. Hi. This is space. Look at the space. In the space, there are 4 actors.
Hi. This is space. Look at the space. In the space, there are 4 actors.
Hi. This is space. Look at the space. In the space, there are 4 actors. I am actor number 1. Look at the space. In the space, there are 4 actors. I am actor number 2. Look at the space. In the space, there are 4 actors. She is actor number 2.
Look at the space. In the space, there are 4 actors. He is actor number 3.
Look at the space. There are 4 actors. I am actor number 1. Look at the space. In the space, there are 4 actors. You are actor number 3. Look at the space. In the space, there are 4 actors. I am actor number 3.
Look at the space. In the space, there are 4 actors and 4 chairs. I am chair number 4.
You are chair number 4. You are chair number 4. Choose
I'm chair number 3.
I'm chair number 3. I'm chair number 4.
She's chair number 1.
I'm chair number 2.
He's chair number 4.
Okay. There's this art piece I really like that I think of. I used to think about a lot. Called 24-Hour Psycho by Douglas Gordon. I'm gonna write it big. 24-hour PSYCHO. And he took the film Psycho by Alfred Hitchcock, and he stretched it out to 24 hours. That's all he did, and he put it in a gallery, and it was very famous and successful artwork. And I enjoy in a way looking at art through these two lenses. No, there's this kind of lens of, or this feeling of the body, the gut, how you relate to it emotionally through your body, but also in this very cerebral way, this simple way, as if all there were to it was you just take something and then stretch it out 24 hours, and then stretch it out in time, and you have a new art piece. And what I like about it is that it kind of suggests that there's these instructions for making art, that you can build, you could, as if you could collect these, you could sort of parse these instructions, collect them together, and build a kind of art machine. And not only that, but the instructions suggest a way to build an infinite number of other artworks. You can have 24-hour Greece, or 24-hour Star Wars, or 16-hour The Sound of Music, or so on. It's infinite. So this is a question about how you build a machine, and I really like this idea of fake it till you make it. So, fake it till you make it, or fake it till it makes itself, or it shapes itself, it's this kind of fundamental problem. How would you get a machine going, or any kind of complex adaptive system? Or when I think about if I think about autopoiesis, this idea that anything in the universe, once it finds a way to kind of organize the universe into a kind of loop that reproduces itself, then that thing automatically has a tremendous advantage over all the other things that can't form themselves into a loop. Because all the things that can't form themselves into a loop, they happen once and then they disappear. Maybe there's some condition somewhere that keeps making them, but then that condition is also a kind of a loop, right? So once something forms itself into a loop, it has this massive advantage into a kind of repetition. But how do you get to that point? For me, it's still a kind of a mystery. And so what I want to describe to you is one of the ways which I kind of accidentally got to this point. And it's about, and I think it's something also that performance theatre offers. It's not the only thing. I think also conversation offers it, for example. But it's this ability to pretend something. In theatre, you can pretend something is a machine, or you can pretend something is a system, or something, until such a point that it somehow, the system somehow learns from your pretending in order to become the thing that you wanted it to be all along. And it's a sort of mystery, I don't know, it's a kind of mystery to me. All that's needed is to make a start, to intuitively set up a system that can be modulated in the making of subsequent versions. The basic idea was this, that the machine should have an input and an output. that it should make descriptions or instructions to see, activating the audience's imagination. There was also a question at the beginning of whether the machine should process its input before or during the performance, i.e., is the performance the processing itself or the showing of the output after the processing? Out of a sense of conceptual compactness and an intuition for self-referentiality of the system, I decided that A, the processing should be the performance, and that B, the machine should make descriptions of other likely or unlikely machines. I decided to work with two improvisers, Margot van der Linde and Iñaki Magno, for their ability as improvisers to function as a live processor. In this first version, Margot and Iñaki described what they saw on a monitor with a few rules. They should start each sentence with "the machine is," or "the machine can," or "the machine will," and from this build descriptions of imaginary machines. I controlled the monitor from the background, showing more or less random images from the internet, as well as a few typed directions such as slow down, speed up, pause, go into question answer mode, describe a factory that makes X. Well, this was version 1. It worked to the extent that it produced the output that was expected, and it was quite entertaining, quite funny, which was partly intended. From the feedback afterwards, the main conclusion was that in order to view the performers plus the television as a machine, the audience needed a kind of transparency about what was going on, about the mechanism of the machine. People needed to see what was going on in the screen. Many people also felt that the machine should not be a machine that describes imaginary machines, but I was still intuitively attached to the circularity of self-reference. Version 2. In order to answer some of the questions thrown up in version 1, version 2 partly adopted a structure from Georges Perec's play, The Machine, radio play, The Machine, whereby performers took the roles of processors and a central control unit within a simple computer-like architecture, and all the instructions and outputs were spoken aloud. I worked with 4 performers this time, Margot, plus members of a Berlin theatre group called Calvin Klein, Michael Norton, Alex Coggin, Jessica, Lauren, Elizabeth Taylor. We rehearsed for 3 days, practicing describing imaginary machines according to precise variables given by myself, the controller. I provided the variables verbally, and we developed a chart of procedures and variables in this time, or as they were referred to, process transformations. The performance consisted of myself as the control unit, first loading the instructions onto a screen, and then giving commands to the 4 performers by microphone, whilst changing the images on the screen for the performers to respond to in a similar way to version 1. So they had the machine is doing, the machine is this, the machine is that, but the rules became much more complicated. So they had rules like you have to say what the machine is, but now you have to do it with 5 words. Or now you have to do it in 5 words whilst singing. Or now you have to do it in 5 words, but all the words have to start with the letter C. Or now you have to do it in 5 words, but all the words have to start with the letter C, and you have to sing, etc., etc. Any combination of rules which we made up. The performers produced a range of outputs from the descriptions of the machine, from descriptions of machines to singing about machines to dancing and movement. There was also a module whereby the performers could themselves become a sub-control unit, thus controlling the other units. The machine tried to end by adjusting the variables of output until the components sounded just like they were human beings talking to each other about the performance itself, before the machine reset again for the final time on my command. Version 2 overall generated 2 main responses. Is this a machine that makes performance, or is it a performance pretending to be a machine? Secondly, what does the fact that there's a control unit have to say about the aesthetics of hierarchy, power, responsibility, and why is this control unit asking such banal things when it seemingly could command anything of the components and the performance? I also became interested for a time in the control structure. The idea that the control structure could appear, reveal itself, and disappear one way or another at certain times during a performance. Since the beginning, I had been interested not only in making an art machine, but in making a self-programming, emergent machine that could in some way start to imitate natural processes such as evolution and sidestep some of the limitations of purely combinatorial and indeterminate chance systems, which cannot alter their own framework or rules. I started reading more around emergent game design and rediscovered an interest in feedback systems that I had since a long time in my work. This is a quote from a book that I found. A number of important observations on the nature of emergence comes forward. Emergent behavior is attributed to feedback loops in the system, and preferably multiple feedback loops. Only one feedback loop would only lead to nominal type 1 feedback. Therefore, emergent systems must consist of multiple elements that act more or less independently. That's by Joris Dormans in Engineering Emergence. So going into version 3, I realized that there actually was a way to do away with the central control unit completely, and to also get rid of this problem of hierarchy by distributing control throughout the machine. By the components internalizing the set of variables we had developed in version 2 and initiating the variables themselves as if they were all the control unit, then the output, the text movement that's produced, and the alteration between the iteration of output n and the previous ones, n-1, n-2, n-3, etc., would allow the next component, n+1, to intuit or parse what process transformation had been used, i.e., the control variables would or could be implicitly broadcast to the rest of the group. By arranging the components' performers in series in a loop, then the output of one performer would be the input of the next, thereby giving the machine perpetual momentum and the capacity of feedback and potentially emergence. In effect, the variable that is being used by the machine at any time is co-produced by the speaker and the next component. It might also be a mistake that is acted upon, and therefore the variable may often be determined in retrospect. We practiced the new patterns proposed by this system, and in particular we paid attention to the rate of change between one component and the next. By keeping the rate of change low, especially at the beginning, it allowed the audience to also follow the rules as they emerge and shift, making the machine's workings, partially at least, transparent to the audience. Additionally, still from version 1, the components should avoid referring to themselves as individuals. They should also speak with certainty. Things are also always true or false, although that changed slightly later on. Additionally, they should never limit through implication they should never limit through the implication of what they say, the possibility of what the machine is, i.e., we never know for sure if what's proposed is for people, if it's a room, if it's the world, if it's the universe. A feeling which is also deliberately alluded to through the subject swap procedure. Version 4.3 was also influenced by a short film, The Perfect Human by Jürgen Leff, 1967. Specifically, I was inspired by Leff's use of the language in creating short, simple sentences. statements, descriptions, and questions that directly and indirectly implicated the audience's own viewing into themselves. I was interested simply in how to make the piece engaging in this way, and also applying process transformations to the audience's own active viewing. I know why it is. It's because I'm not logged in. It's a private video, that's why. No, let me try logging in, but I don't know if I remember my password. No, don't save that. No, do not match. Okay, so let's watch a different one instead. I think this one is not password protected. Let's see. I think that all there is to say about this version is that it's
Now is the beginning.
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 Now is the beginning. So the transmissions could be seen as coming from a valve, but I would suggest that the valve is rather more like a mouth. And in that case, someone's at the door, and the transmission is more like words or like text.
The transmission is like words or text. The transmission is also future story.
The transmission is like words and text. The transmission takes us from the past to the future in a story.
The transmission is a text. The transmission will be a story.
Now is the future. Now it is text.
Now is the future. Now it is text.
Now is the future. Now it is text.
This is text 1.
This is text 1.
This is text 1.
This is text 3.
This is text 2.
This is text 1.
Strictly speaking, counterpoint is a musical term, whereas in dance we would tend to talk about relationship.
The marks of this cosmic mechanical order can be easily recognized.
what really fascinates and draws you in is what you think might be happening behind the curtain. The light peeking through, the suggestion of a secret, something about to happen.
But what draws you in is counterpoint as a musical term, and what is about to happen.
But what draws you in is counterpoint as a mechanical order, and what is about to happen.
But what draws you in is counterpoint as a mechanical order, and what is behind the curtain peeking.
But what draws you in is counterpoint as a mechanical term, and what is peeking behind the relationship.
But what draws you in is counterpoint as a cosmic mechanical order.
But what draws you in is the cosmic mechanical order of relationships happening behind a curtain.
Strictly speaking, what draws you in is the counterpoint of a mechanical musical behind the curtain.
Strictly speaking, what draws you in is the cosmic mechanical order that can be easily recognized behind the curtain.
Strictly speaking, what draws you in is the relationship quality of a cosmo-cosmic mechanical order behind a curtain.
Strictly what draws you in is a cosmo-mechanic counterpoint written as a musical behind the curtain.
The marks of this cosmo-mechanical counterpoint written behind the curtain can easily be recognized.
The marks of this cosmo-mechanical relationship can easily be recognized.
The marks of this cosmo-mechanic relationship, strictly speaking, tend to talk about relationships.
Strictly speaking, the cosmo-mechanical relationships tend to be easily recognized by the marks of this cosmic mechanical order.
Strictly speaking, relationships can be easily recognized by marks.
The machine is a way of articulating core artistic processes that I use. In that way, it occurs to me that I have been modeling a simple version of how I think, especially when I'm making art. At the same time, by working with others, we have begun to create a model that goes beyond how I as an individual think, and is more a model of how I enjoy thinking with others. We have begun to create a collective intelligence, humor, and experience. When the machine is working well, we have the subjective feeling of being a single thinking system. It produces a kind of collective thinking that no one person in the machine could think of on their own. The group have to learn to think together, and to listen to, and to take care of what the system as a whole is doing. As well as being a performance, it also demonstrates ways of creative thinking. One of these is a synonymic logic. When one word is replaced by another, say nature for economy, and this can be thought of a way of testing or proposing possible synonyms or metaphors between terms. In a sense, it's about questioning the difference or distinction of terms, a way of generating ideas and proposals. In the case of the new project, synonyms are proposed between machine, system, network, brain, individual, collective. The machine is a machine. The machine is a system. The machine is a brain. The machine is a cybernetic brain. The machine is a collective brain. The machine is a collective mind. The machine is a collective mind formed of individual minds. The machine is a collective mind formed of individual minds, one or two steps. The machine is a collective mind formed of individual minds, one or two steps more macro than an individual mind. The machine is a collective mind. The machine is a collective. The machine is an autopoietic. The machine is an autopoietic system. The machine is an autopoietic organism. The machine is an organism. The machine is an economy. The machine is an economy of ideas. The machine is an economy of computers. The machine is a computer made of people. The machine is a computer. The machine is a methodology. The machine is a methodology for the machine is a methodology for thinking. The machine is a methodology for thinking together. Notes: it brings agents together into a system. It harnesses the power of feedback loops between people in a system to create and the emergence of new structures and new ideas. So all of the structures, this is like the version you saw before was version 3.1 and this is version 5.20 or something. And all of the structures that you're seeing, they're mostly structures that just happened by keep doing it, keeping doing it. No? Like we didn't sit so much and think like, what complicated things can we do with this, so much as just keep rehearsing, well, that was interesting. What happens if we do that again? Mm-hmm. And these complicated things with books and structures just happen by just keeping doing the same thing over and over again. The structures get more and more complex. Simple transformational elements, we begin with and, add, subtract, take away, become things of greater complexity. These are the simple rules that we began with. Thinking together. The background to the idea of thinking together first came to me through an American physicist called David Bohm in the book called Wholeness and the Implicate Order and Thought as a System. He writes, "What is the source of all this trouble? I'm saying that the source is basically in thought. Many people would think that such a statement is crazy because thought is the one thing we have to solve our problems, and that's part of our tradition. Yet it looks as if the one thing that we use to solve our problems with is the source of our problems." He also writes, "The notion that all these fragments, particles, are separately existent is evidently an illusion. And this illusion cannot do other than to lead to the endless conflict and confusion. Indeed, the attempt to live according to the notion that these fragments are really separate is, in essence, what has led to the growing series of extremely urgent crises that is confronting us today. Thus, it is now well known, this way of life has brought about pollution, destruction of the balance of nature, overpopulation, worldwide economic and political disorder, and the creation of an overall environment that is neither physically nor mentally healthy for most people who live in it. Individually, there has developed a widespread feeling of helplessness and despair in the face of what seems to be an overwhelming mass of disparate social forces going beyond the control and even the comprehension of the human beings who are caught up in it." That sounds like it was written today, but it was written in 1980. Thinking together has 4 complementary ideas. Thinking together. That thinking and languaging creates us and creates the world. It is our greatest tool. Yet, thinking also creates the divisions in the world. It thinks us more than we think it. And because we don't understand these things, thinking creates most of our problems and hinders many of our solutions from being acted upon. That we as 21st century individuals are produced as subjects through the thinking of the whole system, i.e. our very selves and almost everything we do is a result of thinking together. We are only as intelligent as we are because thinking happens as a global computer or system of which we are all a part. 4, final the sense that I could think of thinking together, simply carrying out thought together as a group. So currently this is still true. This thinking together research consists of 4 main parts. The first is this piece that you've seen, the machine. Second is a piece some of you have seen called human simulation. The third is a piece which has the working title, The Wisdom of Crowds. And the fourth is very working titled called Ideas Machine. Okay, so moving on from the machine. When we were making the machine, I felt that we developed a machine that was quite universal. Like, we could start to do really anything with the machine. We kind of, we could kind of imagine how we could write an opera. We could kind of imagine how we could decorate the bathroom. We could kind of imagine lots of things that we could do with it. And at the same time, it clarified for myself that my interests were really in this intersection of complex systems with language, this idea of subjectivity, relationship to language, and the exploration of performance as a substrate for somehow creating algorithms or simulations of other kinds of system. So that was this kind of, this feeling that I had, and what I sort of set myself was this challenge that we would try to make a simulation. We would take this kind of human computer that we built, and we would try to build a simulation of another system on this computer. So I applied for this. At the time, there was an award to apply for as an artist in Holland called the Bio Art and Design Award. And I wrote something along the lines of, algorithmic theatre is theatre that, rather than have a fixed script, follows step-by-step rules and instructions to make decisions and process information such as text and movement. Thus, theatre can form a human simulation, a reference to computer simulations, but where in this case the computer is made of humans. These human systems can simulate biological systems by implementing models such as those describing cell interactions. I propose we would work closely with a Dutch life science institute who would propose a model, and together we would work to understand how to implement such a model in a simulation made of humans. The key would be to translate the model into simple enough units that could be directly transferred to a human actor. It might be preferable if the model contains within it decisions and feedback, so that the simulation would produce complex and emergent behaviors. The key insight was that since, one, the methodology developed for the machine produces a kind of computation, and two, biology can also be understood as a kind of computation, then three, provided we can identify rules that are simple enough, we ought to be able to implement biological rules onto a computer made of people. We found several ideas that could potentially be simulated. For example, around Turing patterns and morphogenesis. But we settled on a seemingly simpler idea of modeling subgraphs or network motifs. Probably you know what network motifs are, but they're simply, in this case, they're like three, it can be any number of nodes, but they're three nodes and edges joined together, and they study these nodes in isolation to see what they produce. And the idea was that where we made the machine, it was a kind of, we could say in a simple way that it was like a four-way subgraph. Actually, it's more fully connected because everybody's kind of listening to everybody all of the time. That we could somehow take this idea and transform it and start implementing these other kinds of subgraphs. This is just a diagram of different subgraphs and feed-forward loops, etc., taken from the internet. This was a bit one of the early ideas we had about how we could put these subgraphs together and move them around stage. We could process information through space. This is just a picture of the 13 simplest 3-node subgraphs. So subgraphs are network motifs, are small triangular sections of networks used to understand what the common patterns are of connection, activation, inhibition, and feedback within a network, and how those patterns of connections enable a biological network to regulate itself. Although the diagrams are made to be fairly simple abstractions, it was actually a huge challenge that I underestimated. Key to the project's success was identifying underlying rules or units that were simple enough to model, and yet these real biological models are very complex. As we wrote in the application, real computer simulations of truly complex biological systems have become unintelligible, also to the scientific human mind. So we had to spend a lot of time trying to figure out what the basic building blocks were of systems theory, cybernetics, gene transcription networks, activation, inhibition, mediated through concentration levels, positive and negative feedback. And through all of this, the breakthrough moment to me was to come back to something so basic about systems that could actually work with it again easily. And it was the idea that 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 you have things and they connect to other things. Thing connects to other things. For me, there's something so comically absurd about this idea that it screams of humanness to me. Does anyone, do you know what I mean?
No.
When I see this idea, I really see the human mind at work. This idea that there's separate things. There's like this quote from David Bohm, no, where he says that the idea that all these particles are really separate from each other is evidently illusionary.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, when we look at the world, we constantly see it as all these separate things, all these separate objects, particles, agents, whatever, connected to other things. And yet, when we think about it, we know that they're not so separate. We know that they're somehow intertwined with each other. And so this, for me, is really, it's like such a human, it just screams out to me, it's like being such a human idea. And that really fascinates me, that we can do so much with this idea, and yet it's so human. And maybe I'll jump forward. There's a kind of paraphrasing a bit. I wanted to find something very simple about cybernetics, and I just kind of borrowed the first sentence of this text that you wrote, and changed it a little bit. But it says, contemporary science sees societies brains, organisms, I added, languages, as complex adaptive systems. What does it mean that our bodies, our brains, our ideas, our cities, our social networks, all seem to share the same structures? Does it really mean that what does it mean if we've really discovered this underlying pattern about how things work? Like, we as this kind of subset pattern of the universe, like, what does it mean if we've discovered the pattern that we are within?
Yeah, I've struggled with this as well. Like in terms of you know, you sort of get this feeling like you've solved everything, like you've been able to basically model your own processes, the way you think and the way you share language with someone else and the way they respond and so forth. And then you solve everything, and you understood all, you've been able to describe the processes, but then we're just stuck here doing it. You know, it's happened so many times with me with my friend Anthony, where we've had this long conversation where we've basically unpacked and described our entire discursive process, and then the conversation is over, and then we're like, we're just stuck here.
Yeah.
and then what do you do with it? So like, and this is like, sort of like how you started this. The first thought that came to mind when you started this presentation was, you posed a question, and then we become this thing, and then what do we want to do with that thing? And I think this is like this reflective turn is really the real center of the challenge of postmodernism, because in modernism you have this unreflectivity within the social system. Like you take it super seriously, like it's and then with postmodernism you don't take any of the social systems too seriously, because you sort of are just understanding the dynamics of the social system itself. But then once you understood the dynamic of the social system, can you then, what do we want to do with this social constructivism?
Right.
What do we want to do with the fact
right.
that we socially construct these groups? And I think that's what you're getting at, right?
Yeah. In a way, yeah, totally. I mean, I think that's like one of the things. I don't know if I was even going to get to this point. Maybe it was at the end of the talk, but yeah, I think that's one of the kind of the powerful things about this kind of set of ideas, is it kind of proposes that it's us. That the problem is us.
Yeah.
The solution is us. We're wrapped up in it. Yeah. Actually, we can get a deep insight into the way the universe works, or the way a corporation works, or why any of these kind of autopoietic systems work, by simply looking into ourselves and our own relationships.
The source.
Like it's like tremendously informative, but it also just says, well, it's all us. So at the end of the day, we're responsible for it.
Well, I would say that once you start thinking in this way, you become aware of how many possibilities there are, how much we actually could do, but then it becomes a kind of overwhelming, because there are just so many things we could do. And as you say, by looking at yourself, you do have a kind of an intuition of what it is to be a human being in interaction with other human beings. There is some intuition, but that's not very well formulated theoretically. When you start formulating it theoretically with these kind of diagrams, you suddenly see that there are many more things you could do than the things you would do automatically. But it doesn't mean that your intuition is no longer useful. Your intuition can still be applied to explore this vast space that you now have opened up. And it's the combination between the theory, like for example complex adaptive systems, cybernetics, and your intuition, which for me should be the guideline, that it will not be easy to find in this vast space what we really want to do, what kind of system do we want to build.
Mm-hmm. I think that's also where it becomes really important to be able to step between scales. Like simply, one would talk about that actions are local, no? Like in a system, everything acts locally, but it has a distributed effect, and the whole system is acting through the whole system globally. But in our own thinking, it's also about like it's great to think big, but it's also really important to think about the details, like the small things, to also like focus on the little things. Like it helps also as an artist, if that is a useful analogy, but it helps sometimes to think about like a small thing you can do, like how to put one word after another word after another word, and then that, or how to move your foot or wiggle your toe, and that will maybe get you through a section of whatever it is you're doing, and also for the audience, however, and the audience and the piece is all one system, but it will also create certain kind of interest, and anyway, it's a kind of small thought, but it's.
But that I think is why I was fascinated by your approach. I mean, you're using a number of concepts that I also use in my theory, but you're using them in a much looser way. But as an artist, you have a freedom that I don't have. That means you can do little silly things like moving one foot or saying something in a louder voice or adding something. You can do all kinds of experiments because you're not supposed to produce a precise description. As a scientist, I'm supposed to produce a precise description that's founded, that is argued for, that has evidence and so on. You don't need to do that. You have the freedom to experiment, and by experimenting you may find connections and intuitions and see patterns that maybe the people who are stuck in their theory and in their evidence may not see.
Mm-hmm. And also, it's yeah, I think so, absolutely. I mean, sometimes even as as a person, I also get bogged down sometimes in trying to think too big or think about too many things, or like it's also but like it's also quite, I think as an individual, as an artist or as a scientist, whatever, researcher, then I was also thinking about this when I was preparing this, about how somehow you have to have this, I think we all carry around with this kind of trajectory, this idea of like, what would it take to change things? You know, what would it take to really change the world? It's almost like...
That's what the last seminar was about.
Oh really? Okay. It's like also always, somehow these days, it's like even a little bit embarrassing to say the words like, what would it take to change the world? No, for some reason we've all been so
Martha can tell you, she has a
bowed down by this sense that is way too utopian and hippie-ish to even say the words. But somehow I find, like as an artist, I somehow carry around this model of the problem and the possible solutions as a kind of orientation, as one of the kind of orientations for where I'm going, for why I'm interested in this and not that, let's say. And for me, that's also why I ended up being interested in systems and cybernetics, is because it seems to be one of the neatest ways to explain a whole bunch of stuff, and also offers some kind of clues to things, solutions, and like practical things, and also cool stuff like making performances where you put one word in front of another, so you can actually do things.
Because it's not limited to a particular domain, it's not limited to images or to biology or to art or to language or to... It can work with all these things. They can all be seen as systems, they can all be seen as interactions, they can all be seen as cybernetic systems that adapt and that evolve and that self-organize. And
Yeah. But sometimes it's really good also as an artist to take this kind of stick which directs you towards the solution that you somehow have in your toolkit of thoughts, and just kind of like take it out and just kind of fold it up and just like throw it away for a while. Put it in the back room and just focus on having fun, doing what you enjoy, you know? For me, it's like about playing with language, it's about playing with ideas, it's about making things up, it's about...
I think the aesthetic criteria is also very important. I mean, scientists rarely admit to it, but in choosing between different hypotheses, what's fun, what's beautiful, what's elegant, what's attractive, what creates passion.
It seems like physicists admit that. In the books I've been reading, they often admit that their selection for a certain model is based on
mathematicians and physicists are the first to admit that, but the others in the other domain, because they try to imitate physicists by being very precise, they are not inclined to admit it. They want to say that we are very objective, we all use data and statistics and models, and they're just as well led by aesthetic criteria.
But there's something about like there's some relationship also between elegance and simplicity, and elegance and beauty, and there's this really lovely quote at the beginning of that book, The Mechanism of the Mind book, by what's his name? Mechanism of the Mind by it's the guy who kind of came up with the idea of lateral thinking.
De Bono.
De Bono.
Ah, yeah, that's a very nice book.
It's a really nice book, and and he at the beginning of the book is this kind of sentence where he says something along the lines of like, it may be that the brain will remain forever a mystery that we'll never solve, or it may be that one day we'll understand the brain in all of its detail. He said it might, because it might not be that the brain is too difficult to understand, but too easy. I thought it's such a nice idea that something could be too easy to understand, you know? And like, of course, if it's like, there must be something simple and elegant which connects all this stuff together. I mean, it can't be so complicated. Okay, where was I? That. I think I just you've seen the piece, Kadel's seen the piece. I think I just show like very for the benefit here, just a short snippet of again. So then no. Well, anyway, we took these. In the end, what happened was we experimented different ways with the subgraphs, putting them together, putting arrows on the floor, getting people to laugh at each other, cry at each other, like laughter activates laughter, crying activates crying, one person laughs when they see someone else crying, like all these different ways of building these relationships together. They had the arrows on the floor. In the end, we hit upon this way of representing the system with verbs, with just connecting, just saying like, this person connects to this person hits this person likes this person now likes this person, and so we could build these networks and describe this network of connections through language, which is the video that I really want to show you. No, this isn't on the insert. Okay. Well, I'll send you the link, and we can edit some of the video in afterwards, maybe. So we made this piece, trying to. It was quite difficult, also, and I think one of the problems is with it is in the end it's so complicated for the performers to calculate in real time what's going on, that we changed this thing of the performance being the real-time calculation to calculating the performance up beforehand, and then they just present what we calculated. And one of the deep problems is that there's three performers on stage for this piece, and 3 agents, 3 nodes in a system isn't very many. It's quite hard to get a kind of this complex things going on, or at least I felt with 3. And so basically at the moment we're posing this problem about how what would happen if we try to turn the audience into a network. Like, how can we network people together? How can we turn the audience into a kind of neural net? Seen that before somewhere, really? might borrowed it from the same PDF as this one. So yeah, very simply, we're thinking about like what kind of rules, what kind of behavior can we do to get people in a room together and connect them together so they become some kind of thinking system. So they become this kind of brain thinking system together. And we're focusing on doing it through, I'm focusing on doing it through language. And so we have various ways that we're approaching this at the moment. One is that simply people are writing and that there's a screen on the stage, and as they write, there's a system that they type in one letter, and there's a system that collects all the letters together and says like, okay, the first letter is A, and then that feeds back, and they all say, okay, well the first letter's A, what's the second letter going to be? And then the letter that gets the highest vote comes into the second place, and so that they can write one letter at a time. We're also playing with ideas of writing one word at a time, or that they can write a sentence at a time, or actually that they write a sentence at a time and then they vote on each other's sentences, so that the idea would be that you could somehow build a system that, well, this is what we're trying to do, the last version we're trying to build is that you somehow build a system that through voting and then getting the votes and then passing back the most popular ones again and seeing if they still win the vote, that within like 10-20 seconds you could get like an audience of 100 or 200 people and somehow get to the best or most popular sentence in the room in that time. There's also the possibility that they can edit each other's sentences, so you start to have this kind of there's a little bit this kind of like stigma-G thing going on. Or there's also a possibility there's only one sentence, and everyone's constantly editing one sentence, and then you get there's a time, an end time. So anyway, we're kind of like busy at the moment thinking of different ways that we can.
I think I mentioned it to you after a theater performance. There is this company Synthetron that has a collective wisdom of the card type of approach that is similar to that, where people write sentences about whatever question they have. What are the problems in our company and how do you want to solve them? And then the sentences are shown to their 4 neighbors, and the 4 neighbors have to vote how interesting they find it. If it's interesting enough, it goes to the 8 neighbors. If it's interesting enough, it goes to the next neighbors, and so it kind of percolates, it kind of propagates. But people can also respond to it, and if then the response is getting higher votes than the original, like that, and in the end the ones that reach the top where everybody sees them, that's kind of the selected wisdom of the cows.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, that sounds like a similar thing. We're also thinking about how you could build about building like a table. So you'd have like a table of relationships between everybody in the audience, which is a bit the same you're doing with like 4 neighbors, but how like over the course of like an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours or however months, that you would that your relationship ratings would go up with your neighbors according to how much they liked your sentence, or how much they edited your sentence, or how much they revoted your sentence. So that over time you would start to build these how to say, these connections, these stronger connections, these affiliations of kind of synaptic connections. That this person tends to like what this person writes, this person tends to edit this person, and so you'd start the chance of a sentence going through these 3-4 people who have proven to be a successful writing editing team would increase over time.
That's what we try to do in our simulation, the ChalTop simulation of the global brain. So we try to make a simulation according to these principles where things would propagate from one agent to another, and if the propagation was synergetic in the sense that they extracted more benefit from it, the link would be reinforced. And like that, the idea was that the system would itself find the patterns to which particular challenges would be dealt with most effectively. It means combinations of people in order that would tackle those challenges. The people that somehow are complementary, work well together, you would find it through self-organization.
Yeah.
But the simulation was very complicated, so it was difficult kind of to analyze it to see how far it was successful.
But in real life, that of course happens all the time. The people who work well together, work more together, and.
For me, the challenge, and you say that this was too complicated. The challenge and what you are doing is actually limiting complexity, not increasing it. It's interesting that if you increase the number of players, you immediately decrease the complication of the roles. Like you simplify the role. You had one, you're like not as many roles as when you had 3 or 4 people in the room, because I think like when they have 3 people in the room, the situation is already super complex, because you have not only like you can think you have 3 components, but it's not true. Like each role is like playing a role, so it's a complement interacting. It's like another player is a situation that this is a theater. Another layer is the situation that I am an actor. Another layer is like me as like not being an actor, playing the actor, and my like hearing everything what is going on, and my aesthetic judgment of like how it will play together. So you have like in that room with 4 people, you have interaction of all those components in it, all thoughts or like interpretations or roles, social roles, and so on. So it's already super complex, and the fact that you are able to like externalize this complexity, which is like always happening, because those machines, we live in them. They are like all social systems are kind of the machines that you are illustrating. It's precisely because you are able to limit the complexity of the normal situation and externalize it. So like make it more visible and tangible for people, because we are in this machine like constantly, and now we are in a machine like going on. But it's because it's so intertwined together, we cannot see them as machines. So you put them out there, you simplify, and now you see, oh yeah, this is interesting, but this is what we are doing all the time. So I wouldn't worry about simplicity of that, because then it makes like the thing visible, more graspable for people.
But it's interesting, because I had never really thought about it that way. But that's what, say, art, literature, film is doing all the time. It's just that simple thing of just isolating something so that you reduce its complexity.
Yeah.
But in so doing, you imply something bigger, like you imply a model. I wrote something about this actually. Thanks, kiddo. yeah, there's this also this idea that. Oh, I just read what I wrote because I can't paraphrase it. In a talk at Fame Theatre in Amsterdam, Joe Kelleher spoke of a theatre process. Theatre being a process of making the complexity of the world into something manageable and bringing it into the space of performance, a space of contemplation, of speculation. In so doing, he says, one starts to build geometries that expand out from small scales amounts of information in lines of flight out into the world around the theatre in order to extrapolate a bigger world. And so, theatre, or a model, is always being about or understood in terms of what is outside the theatre or the model. Or also, we could say the same thing about the mind. This raises the epistemological question, does this mean that we can understand the world? Or does it mean that we can't understand the world? Do you follow?
Mm-hmm.
What does it mean that we can or can't? Huh?
Yeah, in a way he's saying like we can't, the world is so complex that we have to kind of boil it down to something simple, like a model, in order to understand the complexity of the world. And then once we understand this simple kind of constellation of elements, like a small number of agents in a system, or a small number of actors in a film, or whatever, like in films, books, there's always like a limited number of characters. Once we have this smaller model, we can then extrapolate from this thing we can understand. We can draw these lines of flight, and extrapolate to the complexity of the world around us to help us understand the world around us. But then that leaves the question open if we can actually understand the world.
That ties in very nicely with the discussion I was having with a common friend and collaborator of ours, Kate Kingsbury, who is a social anthropologist who has been studying religion. And in her definition of religion, which is typically anthropological religion definition, not so much based on the religions of the book, like Christianity with all the fundamentalist scripture, religion is more about rituals. And rituals are about the enacting of a drama. So, and the drama is what helps you to connect to these wider, complex worlds, because the drama is kind of a small scale, more intense, more visible representation which is shared by the people in the group. And so this, I think, is a very interesting avenue to explore. So I was thinking in these terms, because originally it came from a talk I heard from another anthropologist where he defined religion as a ritual performed, a group of ritual or practices performed in group in order to relate to something that is difficult to grasp. So usually we think about the heavens or God or something metaphysical, but he said anything that is just too complex to grasp. It might be the starry sky or the death of a loved one or a bird. The ritual creates a sense of connection to this thing to which it is intrinsically difficult to connect. And then what Kate added was that the ritual specifically is a drama, which means a particular interaction between actors that kind of condenses the feelings. But she didn't yet go into details what she meant by a drama, but I suspect it's something similar like what you are saying now.
Yeah. I was having.
No, answer.
No, it's fine.
I was this actually this last few sentences that you said. So the first one, can we understand the world? Actually, I don't remember who wrote about it or whom I read. But there was this idea, because I've studied history, and so the idea is that throughout history, the greatest revolution is actually in the way how people are perceiving the world, so that somebody is like giving them a different lens, and then they perceive the world differently. And the world in principle is the same, like this world, physical world here is the same, but people just start, for instance, they start to see a class struggle instead of some people just are lower than the others. But actually, what I wanted to say about this, making a simple constellation and thus helping how theater thus helps people to understand the world. I was just to okay, I have to tell a little about myself. So my husband is writing a story for a news for a journal, like a magazine, on artificial intelligence, on creativity. And then we were discussing how it will probably end up being like, if we have several computers that are very smart, they will probably be able to tell jokes, perhaps, but it will probably also be jokes that only computers can understand, because the computers are already developing, like Google Brain is already developing their own internal way of thinking things, or like producing outcomes. So that, for instance, and also not just computers that have learned through people, but also computers that are working in factory settings, so that you have a person who has actually programmed this machine learning thing, and then they are baffled at the mistakes that the machine learning algorithms make. So they don't understand how they ended up from here to there, basically because it's a mistake that a human would never do, but for the computer it seems to be very logical, because we know that computers are logical. They didn't suddenly get angry, and that's why they made a mistake. So after this discussion, because my husband is a writer, and the outcome of writing is something static, but it was very fascinating to what you said just in the beginning, that it's actually also the artistic, the creative thing is the process, like in theater. So for me, it was actually the machine that you showed, or the performances that you showed, is actually, it's like you're kind of simulating what happens inside a computer, but that is in a sense, or what could be happening inside a computer, so that I perceived that there was some kind of a rule that that one person said something and then the other person changed one little thing, and then just kept on continuing. So it was easily like a loop of learning. So that kind of revealed to me how that was actually the fascinating part, and that was the artistic thing. Instead of us looking at only the outcome, I'm not sure if the part where you stopped, or if the end of the whole performance makes sense in like a traditional thing, that in a theater you might have a hero and then he saves the girl, and then at the end they marry each other. I'm not sure if your performance ended up like that. Yeah, I guess that much. But the fascinating thing was exactly looking at how you did it, and then trying to find the rules, at least for me. So that made me think of how, for instance, artificial intelligence, or the actual, like the man-made physical, how do you put it, like these kind of machines, they're not telling us jokes, but by acting the way they do, and how that might be somehow visualized, could be actually very entertaining to people. And you're kind of already doing that. So you're showing us, this audience here, that this is something that you're making it very simply visible to people, that something like this is happening inside your computer. So I thought that was fascinating. I think that was the valuable thing for many people that you could have in the audience, at least for engineers. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think it's about that's kind of what I was alluding to in the beginning. Also, is that I think it's about doing this anyway. This process was about doing something, starting with something very simple, and then letting it develop. You know? But I think I'm also talking about the kind of the mystery of it. That it was also not, it wasn't something that we planned necessarily that it would go in this direction. I mean, I was interested in these things, and I wouldn't necessarily know how to do it again. That's also the thing, you know. I think that's also what I find really fascinating about it, is like kind of studying it a bit and sort of trying to understand the properties of it to kind of increase the odds of figuring out how to build these things more. But it's also it's also very it's also a strange. There's a lot of trust somehow that you give to the material to become something.
In machine learning, you would have this kind of a seed, the data that you start with, and then you use that as your reverse material. So you know, for every type of material, the starting material that you have, you're going to end up with a different kind of outcome. And then the algorithms that are there might make it so that instead of the outcome being somewhere in here, it's somewhere in here, but there's always room for interpretation, and it's just simply the thing that one person gets a different outcome than another.
Well, what we did, let me jump back here, we'll just quickly, we'll carry on. So this is when we did something similar, the Berschauberg. But what's happening is they're writing, and then let's say at the beginning they end up with like text bubbles. This is the stage of the theatre. This is the stage here. This is the audience. And we're sort of over here somewhere, looking at the stage. So what happens? Initially they can just write, and there's various ways of getting them to write. But the interesting thing, I think, is for me at the moment, is also like what happens when you don't tell them what to write? What happens when you don't tell them why they're writing? What happens when you don't tell them how to write together? Like what happens when you just create this kind of unexpected, you just create this seed that you're kind of like describing, and then you see what happens each time anew in the audience.
Have you looked at the work of Olivier, who is also in ECCO, his poetic generator? It's something similar, but with drawing. There is a kind of a virtual screen that is shared by lots of people, and each has one square in which he can draw, but he sees the whole picture. So whatever he draws connects to what the other people draw, and so they can either kind of, if they see that somebody's starting to draw like the head of the horse, they might start with the neck and the other one with the legs.
Yeah.
And then they coordinate, but then at some moment they get tired of it, and then they start doing something else, and it kind of explodes into anarchy, and then again some pattern arises somewhere, and then people start to adjust their pattern to the pattern of the other guy, and it's very interesting self-organizing artwork.
What we're trying to do here is like, what we're trying to do here, so we do is like we introduce, I wish I had some photographs, we only made this piece once, but we introduce like an actor, a performer to the stage, and then what happens is the performer starts doing whatever's written on the wall. So then the audience have this incentive to keep writing, to make this person do something. But they also introduce this real possibility of anarchy, because they could ask the audience, they could ask the person to do anything, potentially. I mean, no one has done it yet, but if they say, you know, go and stab somebody in the eye with a kitchen knife, you know, like in theory it's possible. And so so you really have this possibility of anarchy, and you really have this possibility of then it becomes quite dramatic then how the system then regulates itself or not.
But in this case, each thing is written by one individual. It does not go to a wisdom of the cards selection.
They can edit each other. They can edit each other. But yeah, I think we we do need to work a lot more on the algorithm, and actually we do need some. It'd be great also to give some advice and some collaboration on the algorithm.
If the code could write some kind of a script scenario together where there is some kind of a continuity where they see what others have written in this part and they can continue so that there is some kind of a story that emerges.
Yeah. Well, what happens, okay, so just to finish the story of the piece, but yeah, totally. What happens is we divide the audience into two brains. So we have another brain over here, so half the audience are in one side. And so we have a red audience, let's say, and a blue audience. And we have two performers on stage, a red performer and a blue performer, and we have red and blue text. And so then you have this, really this feedback loop where this brain is controlling this body, this brain's controlling this body, and the idea is that they come like one after the other. Also actually they did start to make a kind of story happen. They do start to talk to each other. They make up some daft story about how it was quite interesting actually, how one of the characters is like invisible and wasn't there. It was like strangely, at the time I was a bit like, what are you doing? But it was actually, considering that they only had half an hour to figure it out, it was oddly interesting about this kind of disembodiedness, that somehow they got to this point of invisibility and that somebody wasn't there. That they were pretending to be there, but they weren't. It was like very. I think like over a few hours, it would be really interesting to see what kind of things form and yeah. But you were saying something about like.
You should look at the work of Olivier Aubert. He's also on the ECCO mailing list with his poetic generator. It's the graphical version, a little bit of what you're describing.
Very good. What have we got here? How much time do you have? How much energy do you have?
Well, it wouldn't go on too long. I mean, my last seminar lasted 3.5 hours, and now we're already more than 2 hours.
I want to show you just one thing, and then maybe two things, and then we'll wrap up with some closing thoughts. I have to show you this one thing because I asked someone especially to send it to me. So if I don't show it, it's really bad. For you also, of course. I think it's interesting.
Real magic.
Go to page. No, this one's okay. This one I know. This is by a English theatre group. They're quite well known. They're called Forced Entertainment. Okay, let's play.
Nice.
I love this piece because it's really like there's lots of reasons to love this piece, but it's like this really odd way of thinking about systems. Again, like the system that doesn't change somehow. It's like it does change, but the setup is it's really 2 hours of the same setup.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like such a also such an interesting way to think about like what a system is and what a cybernetic system is, and like the invariability in it, you know. Like when I see it, also there's lots of things you see, but also you also imagine in a way like these three agents. You know? They could be anything, right? But they could be like three synapses or three like parts of the brain or three memories, you know, and they just never. It just doesn't matter what you do. You just can't quite get from here to here, you know. And I know that when they were making the piece, they were also thinking about, it was a time in Britain when they had Brexit, and they were like thinking about the sort of, just in a way like the impossibility of change, you know, like they're kind of like in their 50s or 60s, they've seen Britain through different generations, and they're just like, okay, same old. No, so it's yeah, it's really interesting.
I like what you said at the beginning about the repetition, the power of repetition, and how alive a thing becomes, like whatever, if there's like something repetitively, like, you know, happening over and over, it becomes unstoppable, you know. So it's something, and when like, you know, many people when they speak about complex adaptive systems, it's all about change and how things can be different and how easy it is. It's just, you know, a twinkle here and there. But I think a powerful part about it is that yes, and yet it stabilizes, and yet it like what makes those, you know, events reoccur, you know, and what makes them so strong that you cannot really like do much about it. You just participate, you know, and you are stuck in that.
But it's mostly repetition, right?
Yeah.
I mean, most of what's happening is repetition.
The point is, if you assume that there is a kind of an invariant dynamics that A tends to lead to B and B tends to lead to C, if at some stage we get back to A, then the A again leads to B, let's again to C, let's again to A. So whatever complicated trajectory you get, if that trajectory at some moment intersects itself, it just starts repeating itself. And it just becomes self-reinforcing.
And becomes super strong.
But also
that's the essence of self-organization. You start with something that doesn't have any structure, that goes in all directions. And the moment it gets into this closed loop, it stabilizes and it becomes something that is, that has an identity that stays, that's kind of stable.
But they also managed to fit so much variation in there as well. Like, I mean, you only saw like 4 or 5 loops, but it's like amazing also like how many different ways they find to play out this thing. All these little nooks and crannies within this thing, which appears to be pure repetition. They sort of keep pulling variables out of it somehow.
Yeah, but in the simple model, you have this deterministic process that when you go from A to B to C and back to A, it necessarily has to follow exactly the same route. But you can have stochastic systems where from A you might lead to B1 or B2 or B3, and from B1 you may lead to C1 or C2 or C3 and so on. But in the end, if you come in one of the A family, you again go to one of the B family, which goes again to one of the C families. And within these families, you have an infinite number of different loops, but they all stay within the same attractor. And that's a more realistic view. It's not that it deterministically repeats just the same thing, but you see that there is something that's coming back. There's something invariant at a higher level, even though the details vary all the time.
About I was thinking about art and live performances in general. So you might say that, for instance, if you go to a concert and they play Johann Sebastian Bach, and it's been played for hundreds of years, and there might have been gaps, and it's probably not played the same way. Or if you go to an orchestra, like a symphony, if you go to listen to Beethoven, it's been played over hundreds of years, but still you still have an interpretation, not only from the director, but also all the players, and the instruments are slightly different. But once you have, say, a song by the Beatles or Metallica, and its own album, so the album is like a closed loop it's always the same. You can make it slightly, okay, you can say you make it different by listening to it in different stereo setups at home, but the performance is the same. And then as long as the Beatles or the intellectual property rights holders allow artists to make cover versions of it or to sample it, it stays alive like this one. So you have the endless variation, even though it's repeatedly, it's always the same yesterday. But if the property rights holders forbid sampling, and if they forbid making covers, then you end up in this loop where it's only the recording that is allowed. If this happens after the band is dead, if they can't perform it themselves anymore, so then it's actually only the recording.
I'll play one last thing, and then maybe we'll close out. Something maybe a bit more also positive in a different way. Totally different.
Well, joining us live from Paris now is Jude Finisterra. He's a spokesman for Dow Chemicals, which took over Union Carbide. Good morning to you. A day of commemoration in Bhopal. Do you now accept responsibility for what happened?
Steve, yes. Today is a great day for all of us at Dow, and I think for millions of people around the world as well. It's 20 years since the disaster, and today I'm very, very happy to announce that for the first time Dow is accepting full responsibility for the Bhopal catastrophe. We have a $12 billion plan to finally, at long last, fully compensate the victims, including the 120,000 who may need medical care for their entire lives, and to fully and swiftly remediate the Bhopal plant site. Now, when we acquired Union Carbide 3 years ago, we knew what we were getting, and it's worth $12 billion. $12 billion. We have resolved to liquidate Union Carbide, this nightmare for the world and this headache for Dow, and use the $12 billion to provide more than $500 per victim, which is all that they've seen, a maximum of just about $500 per victim. It is not plenty good for an Indian, as one of our spokespersons unfortunately said a couple of years ago. In fact, it pays for 1 year of medical care. We will adequately compensate the victims. Furthermore, we will perform a full and complete remediation of the Bhopal site, which, as you mentioned, has not been cleaned up. When Union Carbide abandoned the site 20 years ago, or 16 years ago, they left tons of toxic waste, which continues. The site continues to be used as a playground by children. Water continues to be drunk from the groundwater underneath. It's a mess, Steve. And
it's a mess, certainly. Jude, that's good news that you have finally accepted responsibility. Some people would say too late. It's 3 years, yes. Almost 4 years on. How soon is your money going to make a difference to the people in Bhopal?
Well, as soon as we can get it to them, Steve. We've begun the process of liquidating Union Carbide. This is, as you mentioned, late, but it's the only thing we can do. When we acquired...
Has anyone seen this before? No. It's one of my favorite examples. I don't know if it's theater or they would probably more call themselves activists. But this guy's not from Dow Chemical. He's from a activist artist collective called the Yes Men, and they do this thing called what they call identity correction. So they create a website pretending to be like the PR department of large corporations, and they just kind of fish in the internet until someone asks them for an interview or a statement on TV, this kind of thing, and then they get invited onto TV, and then they figure out how to kind of best use these opportunities to alter the identity to create these kind of situations. No, I think this is maybe one of their more famous ones. And I think it's a brilliant, and in terms of, and thinking about that as a system, so thinking about like say a corporation as a system and where its weak points are. So in terms of like changing things, changing a system, you have to kind of like identify where the weak points are in the system. And for a big corporation, its weak points is somehow the way it kind of spews out information or lets information in. Where things like any organism, no, like the points where it ingests or expressed, like things go in, things go out. They're these kind of weak points of the organism, and what they're somehow able to do in this thing is like as if they kind of momentarily join these two systems together to alter the operation of the other system. So it's very much like this kind of recursive or network of, I would think about it like this is kind of like networks of autopoietic loops or semi-autopoietic loops, but they're all touching each other at different points because each organism, each network, or each system relies on its neighboring systems for what it does, and that gives you this possibility to reconfigure the way these systems like connect to each other.
You can change a very big stable system in this way, creating exactly this like a little not connected to anything like official network of communication, which assumes the identity of the other. So like kind of redirects like whatever like normally connects to this one. And it's stable and it behaves a certain way, you are like not permitted to do it, but you do it, and you say like we are that. So like completely shifts stage. And a little bit what we were discussing in the last seminar about changing the world and global governance system and so on. Like start something new and say it's a global governance system, like and just attach this name to it and like roll over from there, so without anybody's permission, like institutionalized blessing and so on.
Great idea. Yeah, global government system.
How did DAO react to this?
There's another video where they, because it goes around the world, the news very quickly. It's like DAO has accepted responsibility, and then like half an hour later, there's like other news comes out saying, no, we don't. No, we've never. Which of course is tremendously embarrassing then that they have to then publicly say we don't accept responsibility.
Exactly. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
It's much more difficult to negate something positive about you than just to keep silence about it.
Yeah.
And just do it.
Yeah. Well, great. Yeah. Great, thanks for listening to me.